The best laid plans of ravens. In Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven, a raven visits a lonely man's home and responds to the man's pleading questions with only the words, "Nevermore." The poem's narrator interprets the word as a prediction of doom for his future. A talking prophetic raven may seem to be the wild imaginations of a poet, but a new study published in the Journal of Science hints that one particular idea behind the poem might not be as far-fetched as it seems. For most of human history, people assumed animals do not understand the passage of time in the same way people do. Some people believe that animals might remember events from the past and that instinct drive them to make preparations in order to guarantee survival. But most people did not think that animals had the ability to plan. At Lund University in Sweden, researchers argue that ravens may be able to think ahead and even plan for the future. There's our thesis claim. So what's going on here in the paragraph, they're using the poem as a hook to get the reader interested and draw them in. Most people don't believe animals can plan for the future, but there's a group in Sweden, a group of scientists that argue ravens may be able to plan ahead. Paragraph 2. It can be difficult to test animals' ability to plan because human observers must be certain they're not mistaking instinctual behavior for intentional planning. For example, many animals hoard food. Cognitive scientists argue that in order for an animal's behavior to qualify as preparing for the future, the animal must use specific decision-making skills to solve a problem. To avoid mistaking instinctual behavior for evidence of decision-making, they designed 2 experiments to test ravens' ability to plan. For the first experiment, the researchers showed the birds how to use a small stone to open a box and get treats. Once the raven learned the behavior, the researchers presented the birds with 4 stones. Only 1 stone was the right size to open the box. The birds learned to select that stone. Okay, that's kind of interesting. And set it aside until the researchers presented the box. The second experiment involved bartering. A researcher would trade the ravens a large treat for a bottle cap. Later, the researchers presented the ravens with a group of items, including small treats and the bottle cap. The ravens chose the bottle cap over the treats and waited for the original researcher to trade with them again so they could get more treats. In both experiments, the ravens waited patiently for up to 17 hours for the researcher to return. Okay, paragraph 2 basically tells us it's a tricky thing to figure out if the animal's planning ahead because it might just be instinctive traits. So paragraph 3 then tells us they designed their experiments to avoid that. And paragraph 4 begins to outline the design of those experiments. In the first experiment, the researchers showed the birds how to use a stone to open a box to get treats, and they always chose the right stone to open the box. In the second experiment, they traded a bottle cap for large treats, and when they were given small treats, they rejected that and took the bottle cap knowing they would get large treats. And they waited a good amount of time, too, in order to get what they wanted, suggesting these ravens were planning ahead. Paragraph 5, the results of these experiments are exciting, but, always a transition to but, contrasting. More evidence needs to be gathered. So like other science passages we've seen, and it's quite typical, there is not a definitive conclusion here or a definitive result. There's still open questions. So we can't fully conclude that ravens plan for the future. Some scientists argue the ravens might be choosing the stone because they've been trained to do so. Regardless, pretty interesting results. Okay, so again, nonfiction science passage following a fairly typical structure of here's the problem, here's the experiments designed, here's the result, and by the way, in this case, the results are not necessarily conclusive, but they're promising. So the author has somewhat of a positive attitude toward the idea that ravens can plan ahead, which is the main idea of this passage. I think we're ready to answer the questions.